Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Dudley Charlton Regional School Committee. It is Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. It's 7 p.m. and we're at the Charlton Middle School. Tonight we're going to have a joint meeting between the Dudley Selectmen and offices and the Charlton Selectmen and offices, and we thank you for being here, for everybody. We're going to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll take a moment of silence. Okay, thank you very much. Before we go into our new business, what we'll do is just do some introductions. We'll go around the table. I'm Kathy Carmignani, and I'm the chair of the school committee, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
I'm Jamie Terry. I'm the vice chair of the school committee. I also appreciate you being here.
I'm Brian Ackerman. I'm the assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, and thank you all for being here.
My name's Kelly Zella. I am one of the newer school committee members for Charlton, and we always appreciate your time, so thank you.
Jamie DeLovo, also newly elected Charlton resident to the committee, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Henry Kamasi, I'm on the Charlton Finance Committee.
Sorry. I didn't give that notice.
Andrew Gold, Town Administrator, Town of Charlton.
Bill Borowski, Charlton Board of Selectmen.
Steve Coronas, Chairman of the Charlton Board of Selectmen.
Barbara Zarowski, Charlton Board of Selectmen.
Patsy Ridlack, Charlton Board of Selectmen.
Rich Carmignani, Treasurer, Collector from the Town of Dudley.
John Rudick, Town Administrator from Dudley.
Mark Landry, Board of Selectmen, Dudley.
Jay Johnson, Chairman, Dudley Board of Selectmen.
Mike Mayock, Chairman, Dudley FAA.
Bob Bergeron, Director of People Personnel Services, Dudley Charlton.
Jean Costello, School Committee, Charlton.
Caitlin Panzik, School Committee, Dudley.
Rich Matthew, Director of Finance and Operations for the regional schools.
Stephen Marsh, Superintendent for the Dudley Charlton Regional School District, and I also appreciate everybody attending this evening to talk about this very important financial matter.
Great. I know that we also have some department chairs from Dudley as well, maybe Charlton as well. I don't know if anyone else feels like they want to introduce themselves, or if Mr. Ruda wants to introduce anyone.
Sure. We have Police Chief Karlovich. We have Chief Kochanowski from our Fire Department, and I believe our Highway Superintendent is on his way.
Great. Thank you so much for taking your time. I appreciate it. We'll move on to new business. Letter A, we have the Abrams Group will present an independent analysis of anticipated costs and revenues for municipal government and the Dudley Charlton Regional School District assessment. And specifically, we'll address the shortfalls, anticipated absence of a Proposition 2.5 override in the town of Dudley. So this is going to happen via teleconferencing, video conference.
So, Madam Chair, I just want to go over a couple of ground rules for the presentation because of the video conference. I am going to ask Mr. Abrams, the Abrams Group, to unmute and prepare for the presentation, but will be a little bit of a complex process, so I just want to make sure that we go over this. There will be a time for Q&A. We were hoping to do that at the very end of the presentation. The way that we would like to handle that is to have the question asked. Mr. Matthew, who has a direct mic for the so we don't get a lot of feedback, we'll repeat the question for the Abrams Group, and then we'll let the Abrams Group try to respond to the question. There may be a 1 second or 1 minute lag in between all of that, just for timing purposes, but that is the way we want to try to handle the Q&A at the end of the presentation from the Abrams Group. Everybody, we do have microphones for everybody. At times, even though Mr. Earl works magic with our system here, if you do have a question, you may want to turn the mic and direct your question into a microphone at least. He will try to capture it where the microphones are, but it would be helpful to direct into a microphone for the questions as well. This meeting is being recorded, but it's also being streamed live on our website. I have it up on one of my devices here, so it is working at this point in time for the communities to see. So it is live. I know that Ms. Gage is from the town of Dudley and is here as well. I believe it will be on the Dudley Access channel after this meeting. Now, is it live now? Is it? It's live on YouTube, even better. So it's live on YouTube at the same time. So these recordings, because the expectation isn't that everyone will walk away with a complete and clear understanding of Chapter 70 funding, so you do have the ability to go back and watch the videos to understand it a little bit more. So that is going on right now for housekeeping purposes. So now we're going to try to bring in Mr. Abrams' group to have his presentation. Then I will do a presentation of the an overview of the FY24 for the school district. And then the boards can, again, Q&A for all of this, and the boards can do as they choose, and there'll be a small recess somewhere in there for the boards after that, okay?
Kathy, as we bring that up,
Yes.
through you, can we ask Mark or Matt to, I know there's a lot of new people in the room, in the audience, or even watching TV. For some of the acronyms, can you make sure that they're spelled out for the folks at home, just to make sure?
Sure, can you make sure?
Rich, can you pick up?
And that's going to be a reminder that we can all use tonight, is to make sure we talk through an acronym.
Like I saw MRGF, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Abrams, can you, I don't think you can hear us.
Mark, can you hear us?
Oh, wait, I'm muted.
Mark, can you hear us?
Loud and clear. All right. Little feedback. Echo.
Could try again.
All right.
Whoever's on speaker should go on mute, I don't know.
This wasn't happening before. That's you may have more than one mic on again. It's this one.
Can you try this again?
Still some echo.
There's no echo from
We're
him.
ready for him to go, so.
You're good to proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Abrahams, president of the Abrahams Group. With me is my son, Matt. This is our second presentation. Rich, is the PowerPoint up?
It is not.
All right, do I have share capabilities?
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Mark, it was also requested for some of the use of acronyms, if you could clarify what the acronym represents, if it's utilized a couple of times. That was asked before you begin your presentation as well.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is our second presentation of Dudley and Charlton and the Dudley-Charlton Regional School District summary of regional finances. We made our first presentation December 12. This presentation basically repeats that December 12 presentation. There are some changes. The region has adjusted some of its numbers, so you'll see a reflection of that. Since December 12, we've had guidance from DESI and some updated numbers on DESI. So we tried to refine our fiscal 24 estimates for Chapter 70, and that's included in this presentation. And now that Charlton has joined us, we've included some estimates of the Charlton's assessment in this presentation. Keep in mind that the governor's budget, a new governor has until at least early March to present her budget, including Chapter 70 numbers for fiscal 24. Thus, the numbers that you'll see this evening and saw on December 12 is our best estimate at this time. And actual results will, and I repeat, will vary. We ask that you hold your questions until we finish our presentation. I'll do a little quick introduction. Matt will walk you through some of the Dudley numbers, and then I'll talk to you about Chapter 70 from a regional perspective and from the two-town perspective. So these slides summarize a financial forecast of the region and the town of Dudley. A more detailed slide deck is available for the region fiscal 23, Chapter 70, and net school spending numbers, which goes into far more detail and a more robust explanation of how the formula works. A Dudley Charlton region and Dudley and Charlton Chapter 70 and net school spending workbook is also available. And I would consider that a work in progress as we get more guidance from DESE on fiscal 24, Chapter 70. There's also a detailed revenue and expenditure workbook for the Dudley financial forecast. That's also available. And I would ask you to remember that these numbers tonight are based on forecasts, not final budgets. And there's still some refinements to go, and I believe we'll have one more final presentation down the road. So why are we here tonight? To understand Dudley's fiscal needs and pressures, to understand that Charlton does not face similar revenue shortfalls as the town of Dudley, to understand the region's financing needs, their expenditure projections and revenue streams, and then to determine the next steps. With respect to the town of Dudley, Matt will walk you through a revenue forecast, an expenditure forecast, and we also have Dudley tax-related and reserve information included in here, plus a summary of the forecast. With respect to the region is projecting an expenditure increase for fiscal 24. We've done a projection through fiscal 28, carrying the fiscal 24 expenditures through fiscal 28 as a projection. We also have a Chapter 70 analysis, fiscal 23 final numbers that came out in July, as well as our best estimates of fiscal 24 as of today. Other revenue and a summary at the end. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you for the financial forecast.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is Matt Abrahams, also part of the Abrahams Group. We have a few slides related to the financial forecast, which was done for the town of Dudley, that we will walk through over these next few slides. So some objectives for the financial forecast for the town of Dudley. We're focusing on the 5-year period of FY24 through FY28. We worked with town staff to project departmental and townwide expenses for those fiscal years based on actual expenses in recent years, the FY23 budget and/or other factors. And we did the same with revenues. We worked with town staff to project revenues for that time period based on actual revenues in recent years, the FY23 budgeted revenues and other factors. And we compared projected revenues to projected expenses to understand the expected shortfalls in the over the 5-year period that we were looking at, of FY24 to FY28. Slide, please. This slide shows the results of our projections and the data that we gather related to revenues. So you can see the top table has historical revenues from the last few fiscal years that were completed, FY18 through FY22, and you can see the percent change in those numbers year over year in that same table. And the bottom table shows the projections that we came up with from the work that we did We projected FY '23, which is the current fiscal year, as well as the 5-year period that we were focused on moving forward, FY '24 through FY '28. And like with the top table, we're including the percent increases year over year. And again, these are just projections moving forward. The comment at the bottom says that this is general fund only and includes indirect costs from the enterprise fund. Next slide. Same or similar slide for expenses, also showing the historical look over the last 5 completed fiscal years, FY '18 through FY '22, as well as the percent differences between those years, year over year. In the bottom table, the same projections going forward. I want to note, though, that the table in the bottom reflects the original estimates that we had. Since then, assessment projections related to Dudley Charlton. The assessment from Dudley Charlton have been updated. We had the number at 2.2 million with our first presentation back in December. That number is now $1.7 million, as you can see in the comment at the bottom of the screen. However, the FY '24 number in that table was not updated. So that number is overstated by about $500,000, and then also the impact for the other years as well, since the assessment would grow based off of that number. So basically, you can subtract anywhere between $450,000 and $500,000 from each of those numbers to get the updated numbers. That also means that the percent difference for FY '24 is not 18.6 as we saw it, more like 16%. So when we think about FY '24, what are some of the reasons for the expense increases? We did see a big jump, as you probably noticed from the prior slide. So here are some of the reasons. We already mentioned the Dudley Charlton assessment, $1.7 million. That's the increase over the current fiscal year of FY '23. Again, just projections at this point. New positions account for about $300,000. And you can see the list of new positions that we've included there: assistant town administrator, HR, social worker in the police department, 2 firefighters, a health agent, as well as a building inspector, not for FY '24, but for FY '25. County retirement went up 12%, or we have projected going up 12%, which is about $130,000. Group insurance, we have projected going up 7%. We also added in the impact of the new hires that were mentioned, and that all equals about a $200,000 increase, FY '24 over FY '23. Debt up $500,000, OPEB up $40,000, and municipal expenses $300,000. Some of the expenses that are included in the municipal expenses grouping are the cap landfill, energy, and radios, as well as other expenses. And there were also other increases related to compensation. So this slide is the summary slide where it pulls together the data that was presented on slides just prior. Again, the 5 recently completed fiscal years, comparing the revenues and the expenses from those years to one another. So you can see the bottom line at the bottom of that table, as well as the same comparison but going forward for the fiscal years that we work to project. 23, the current fiscal year, 24 through 28, 5-year period that we were looking at moving forward. And just keep in mind, as I said earlier, with the expense line, those numbers are overstated because of the reduction in the Dudley Charlton assessment from our last presentation. So again, about $450,000 to $500,000. Those numbers would be reduced by about $450,000 to $500,000.
With respect to the region, you're going to see on these slides a lot of numbers. Keep in mind the acronyms and try not to abbreviate those. This slide gives you a visual presentation of the Dudley Charlton trends since the inception of ed reform, which is on the far left, fiscal '93. The red is Chapter 78, and you'll see that Chapter 78 grew at a higher rate to get everyone at foundation, and then it kind of leveled off And for the region, you've been a minimum aid community for a number of years. Essentially, you're receiving around $30 per pupil for each of your foundation enrollment students. The diagonal blue represents your foundation budget, which is a state target of expenditures to be funded by Chapter 70 in the red, and local contributions, which is in the white here. This dotted line is the required net school spending, an amount set by the state for every district to fund based on their ability to pay, based on their wealth factors. And the solid line is your actual net school spending. And you'll see that right around 2000, these lines were very, very similar. The foundation budget line, the requirement line, and the actual net school spending line, very similar. And only in recent years have you had an excess of actual net school spending greater than the requirement. This chart is backed up by a lot of data. Both of these are available from the DESI website. This chart is abbreviated to fiscal 08 through fiscal 22. On the Excel spreadsheet, you could go in and unhide the rows and you would see numbers going back to 1993. So this summarizes on the bottom the trend since fiscal 2008. That's basically a 14-year period. Foundation enrollment, that's your students that live in Charlton and Dudley that attend a public school. Those are the students that you are financially responsible for. That number has declined by 22.5% since fiscal 08. The decline that we captured in a similar study we did 5-6 years ago was 9%. So the decline has been increasing in both the number of students and percent since our last study back in 2017 and 18. The foundation budget, again, a target of spending established by the state, increased 13%. It had increased 16% when we had presented in 2017. The required local contributions, that's your town appropriations from Dudley and Charlton, increased 51% since 08, the same increase we noted back in our last study. However, Chapter 70 only increased 6.6%. It had increased 22% in our 2017 study. This is the impact of minimum aid that you've received for many, many years. Required and actual net school spending increased 25% for required and 36% for actual net school spending since 08. And the fiscal 22 excess actual spending over the requirement was 11%. It was only 4% in 2017, so that's seen a growth. However, it's still below the statewide average of 28%. If you go on DESI's website, you'll get the full array of data for the region, and you could also compare that to the state averages. Each town is required to fund from local contributions a minimum local contribution. This chart shows A on the left, the target, and B on the right, where you are in reaching that target. It has EQV up here. It has income here. This is the wealth formula. That's the foundation of the Chapter 70 formula. The state wants to see statewide, this is funded 50-50. 50% from EQV, 50% from income in determining your ability to pay. Notice that the EQV is much higher dollar-wise than income. In order for this to be 50-50, the state deflates the EQV and inflates the income. The result is adding 4.1 million from EQV to the income number to get $9.5 million. That's one test of what each community should be spending in terms of the calculations. The numbers are obviously different for each community. The second test is that the state has promised every district 17.5% of foundation will be paid by Chapter 70. Therefore, the second test is to take your foundation budget, again, the target of spending, multiply that by 82.5%, and you get $18 million. And then the state takes the lower of this number and that number, which is 9.5 million. That's your target. Divide the 9.5 million by the foundation budget, and you get a target local share of 42%. So that's the target. Let's see how Dudley is doing to meet that target. So on the right is the calculation of your local contribution. This is for fiscal 23, the current fiscal year. It starts with the previous fiscal year, 22, local contribution, 7.2 million, increases it by the municipal revenue growth factor on the belief that the schools should share in the town's growth of municipal revenues. So last year's contribution is increased by the municipal revenue growth factor. This is calculated by the Department of Revenue and given to DESI. That results in what is called a preliminary contribution of $8 million. Divide $8 million by the foundation budget, and you get 35%. The target was 42%. Actual is at 35%. So the shortfall is 6.7%, or $1.5 million in actual dollars. When there's a shortfall, the state says, if that shortfall is between 2.5% and 7.5%, then an increment of 1% is added. So last year's contribution is increased by 1%, which is roughly $72,000. Why? Because if the local contributions were left to just the municipal revenue growth factor, Dudley in this case would not reach the target. Keeping in mind, every year these numbers are updated. EQV gets updated every 2 years, income gets updated every 1 year. So Dudley's contribution is $8 million plus the increment of $72,000 to get Dudley to $8,062,000. So the comment on the bottom is that Dudley's local contribution is based on its wealth factors. It's below the effort target by 6.7%. Dudley will continue to increase its local contribution and maybe an increment until it reaches its local target. Charlton's calculation is identical, but the numbers are different. On the left, EQV deflated, $6,500,000. Income inflated, 8.2, 6.5 plus 8.2 gets you to 14.7. The 82.5 test gives a higher number. So Charlton's contribution target is 14.7. Divide that by the foundation budget, and you get 56%. Where is Charlton? Last year, 13 million. A lower growth factor than Dudley brings Charlton to 13.7, which is 52%. The target was 56%. The delta is 3.87, which falls in the 2.5 and 7 range. So Charlton gets an increment. Add the preliminary to the increment, Charlton's contribution townwide is 13 million plus. And the note on the bottom is very similar to Dudley. The two towns are almost identical in that. Each town is based on the wealth factors. Charlton's contribution is below the effort. And like Dudley, will continue to increase its local contribution by the growth factor and maybe an increment until it reaches the local target. So both towns are very similar in that respect. Now I recognize that going forward, Charlton had, I believe, around a $2 million new growth figure, and I'll comment on that when we get to fiscal '24. So how is Chapter 70 computed for the district, for the region? Chapter 70 comes into the region, onto the two towns. It starts with last year's base aid, fiscal '22 base aid of 24 million. The regional foundation budget is 42 million. Add up the two district contributions from Dudley and Charlton, and you get 18 million. So subtract the local contributions from the foundation budget, and you get foundation aid of 23,277,000. Then you look at what did the district receive from the state Chapter 70 prior year aid, and it's higher than the foundation aid, 24.5 million compared to 23.2 million. So the region does not receive foundation aid increase. Instead, it gets $60 per pupil increase for each of its foundation enrollment. $60 for fiscal '23 was higher than the last 5 years of minimum aid due to the surplus that the state received in coming out of fiscal '22. So take the 24 million, add the 199,000, and Dudley's Chapter 70 is $24.7 million. And you can see the notes over here. The takeaway here is that Dudley Charlton as a region is a minimum aid district, and it has to close this gap, 24.5 million compared to 23.2 million, in order to start seeing foundation aid and get out of being a minimum aid district and start seeing more support from Chapter 70. Now, this delta is 1.3 million in fiscal '23. When we did the study 5 years ago, that delta was 2.6 million. So you're closing that excess of base aid over foundation aid gap by 50% over the last 5 years. How the region comes together, you take the two towns, this is a municipal-based formula, and regions are pulled from the municipalities, the members that belong to the region. So you'll see the numbers of Dudley on the left, Charlton on the right, and then the summary on the far right. On a per pupil basis, this represents the 57 or so academic districts in Massachusetts. And this is the DESI's comparative of per pupil spending. You'll see that there are some data points that are not included in the per pupil spending. Dudley Charlton is 7th, lowest of the 57. In 2017, Dudley was the lowest. So like we saw earlier that the region is closing that excess gap, it's starting to climb up on the ladder of per pupil spending, but still has a way to go. With respect to fiscal '23, the expenditure budget of $53 million matches the revenue budget of $53 million. And you'll see that Chapter 70 is $24 million of that $53 million. Transportation aid of $1.8 million. And the other revenues are not that high compared to the Chapter 70 amount. What funds the district primarily is the assessments to the towns, $25 million. So between the assessments and the Chapter 70 aid, that constitutes most of the regional revenue sources. There are two types of assessments. For regions, you are under the statutory method of assessing, which basically takes your minimum district contribution as the first step down, and then adds transportation, debt, and capital to that, as well as the excess of net school spending greater than the requirement. So we start with the requirement. That's why we spent some time earlier looking at the requirement. And this is the current year 23 assessment compared to fiscal 22. You'll see the minimum for both towns. That's the minimum required district contribution, plus transportation, plus the additional, which would be the excess of net school spending greater than the requirement. The assessments really haven't increased much over the years. 18 and 19 almost a wash to 19 and 20, and then assessment increases between 2 and 3% going forward. But the region is projecting roughly a $3.6 million increase based on the preliminary estimates. Those that saw our presentation in December, this number was higher. So this has been reduced. While that number, this number, is not final, it's at least double the recent increases. The region may be projecting between 700 and 750,000 increases per year over the next few years, which is an increase between 5% and 6% beyond fiscal 24. So from a revenue projection point of view, the region will continue to be a minimum aid district until the foundation aid is greater than its base aid. And as I mentioned, that difference is $1.3 million. While that difference has been reduced since 2017, the region can expect a minimum aid estimate of $30 per pupil, and we'll see if there's a surplus that will raise that back to $60 per pupil, but roughly $100,000 a year. And other regional revenues are projected to be flat. The region believes the high watermark for the district budget increase for '24 is 3.6 million, and then followed by annual increases of 3 to 4%. That could potentially, and I repeat, these are not final numbers, potentially be an assessment of Dudley of 1.6, 1.7 million, and $2 million to Charlton. In addition, the district is projecting between 700 and 750,000 annual increases to Dudley beyond fiscal '24. And I repeat again, these are estimates. So where is the region heading with respect to chapter 70? We walked you through fiscal '23. The challenge is fiscal '24. DESI provided some guidance over the last 3 to 4 weeks after the December 12th presentation as to how regions could project and districts could project their chapter 70 for fiscal '24. Not all the numbers are known. So for example, the municipal revenue growth factor for Dudley and Charlton, we don't know what that number is going to be for fiscal '24. And as I mentioned, Charlton had a $2 million growth factor for fiscal '24. So that's going to increase Charlton's municipal revenue growth factor, but we don't know how much at this point in time. So we froze several variables in the formula. We froze the growth factor. Originally, we froze the EQV and the income. We froze the, what is called foundation shares of how a townwide contribution is allocated between the regions to which it belongs. And the conclusion is that Dudley and Charlton, being below its local effort, will continue to increase its local contribution by the growth factor and maybe an increment of 1% and 2% until it reaches the local target. So what you'll see here is Charlton on the top, its contribution increased by the growth factor to get to the preliminary, and then the increment of 1%, giving you the required local contribution townwide, and then the allocation based on foundation shares to the regions that Charlton belongs. Same with Dudley. And then this number carries forward to the next fiscal year, et cetera, et cetera. What we don't know is what the growth factors are going to be. The growth factor for Charlton has to include the $2 million growth factors from the assessors, but these increases are averaged to a 3-year average. So it takes the spike out of having a significant growth in local growth in any one particular year, and it smooths that out. So will Charlton have a 1% increment in fiscal '24 or a 2% increment in fiscal '24? We don't know that, but it should be at least 1%. Same with Dudley. Dudley should be at least 1% going forward. So this is to help you plan down the road with respect to what your townwide contribution is and then the share of that to Dudley Charlton region. There's far more detail in the bigger slide deck that is available. So summarizing the region, the high water mark for budget increase, 3.6 million, followed by annual increases 3 to 4%. These are estimates. Per pupil spending, 7th lowest among academic districts, roughly 57 academic districts. It was the lowest in 2017. The region's actual net school spending over the requirement is $12 million, 12%. The statewide average, 28%. Since its base aid increase exceeds its foundation aid, the region's Chapter 70 will only increase by $100,000 annually over this period. Other revenues are projected to be flat. The region is funded mostly by assessments, thus the funding burden will be financed through assessments. And that could potentially be a $1.6, $1.7 million assessment to Dudley. So where does Dudley stand to finance this? The tax rate for '22 is $11.70. It's the same for both residential and commercial properties. Dudley's tax rate is relatively small in comparison to similar communities, and you can see that on the right side of the table. And you can see the last 5 or 6 years of Dudley's tax rate. The Board of Selectmen voted on the recommendation of the assessors to leave the tax rate at single and set it at $10.16 per thousand for fiscal '23. So this updates you from 17 to 22, and then a $10.16 per thousand tax rate is even lower than what we had in this chart. Excess levy capacity. So the levy ceiling in every community is 5% of the fair value of properties. You cannot exceed that ceiling. The levy is based on last year's tax levy, increased by 2.5%, and increased by the growth. The difference between the maximum levy and the and the levy is the excess levy capacity. And you'll see for Dudley that excess levy capacity has been very, very small over the last several years, and is only $3,800 for fiscal year '23. However, the difference between the tax levy and the tax ceiling gives you the override capacity. And that's the gap between the total tax levy and the tax ceiling that is available for an override. And Dudley is considering an override, not of these numbers, but clearly the number that they may be considering for fiscal '24 is clearly within the override capacity. And we haven't determined what that Dudley override number is at this time. We believe the next presentation, once the regional budget is finalized and Dudley's budget is finalized, we'll be able to share that number with you then. Dudley's certified free cash has been stable the past 4 years. As a percent of budget, it's been pretty stable. Undesignated fund balance, the general fund has been growing. Dudley Stabilization Fund, this shows over the last several years through '22, The most recent number is $759,000. And Dudley's retained earnings on the enterprise funds have been increasing. So in summary, the region projects a $3.6 million increase in their operating capital costs for fiscal '24, translating to an assessment for Dudley of $1.6 million, $1.7 million, with projected increases beyond '24 of $750,000 going forward. Three primary sources of funding: Chapter 70, other state and local receipts, town assessments, with Chapter 70 and town assessments being the bulk of the revenue sources. Chapter 70 is projected to be minimum aid over the next several years. There is some glimmer that you could be a foundation aid community in fiscal '25 or fiscal '26. To be conservative, we're using the $100,000 figure for minimum aid. Other state and local receipts are projected to be flat. Thus, the burden of the financing will lie with the assessments. Dudley has minimum capacity to meet these increased assessments to fund Dudley's needs and the regional needs. Dudley's tax rate is relatively low compared to other communities. Dudley's ARPA money and CARES Act funding helped stabilize town finances over the last few years, but these funds will not be available going forward. While Dudley's reserves have leveled off, they are not sufficient to meet upcoming needs. So thank you for listening to us and presenting a lot of numbers to you. We can open this up for questions at this time. So Rich, I'll turn it back to you and Steve.
Well, obviously, that was a lot to take in. But you're all very smart municipal people, so I'm sure you might have some questions from Mr. Abrams and his group.
Sure. Ms. Lamarche, can I start? Do you mind?
No, again, remember the model's going to be ask the question, Rich is going to try to repeat it so that,
Okay.
okay?
Through the chair. I just wanted to clarify, one of the things that was said a couple of different points during the presentation was that our region is the 7th lowest, I'm trying to get to what page it was on, 7th lowest in the state, and I actually think it's the 9th. I know it's not a large difference, but I do think it's the 9th, and I think that it might be stated two separate ways in the presentation, so I just wanted to clarify for anybody listening at home that may not have the paperwork in front of them. I think we're actually the 9th lowest per pupil expenditure. That's shown on slide 17, and then it was shown again thereafter.
In between, if I could, all these documents are available on our website behind the school committee agenda, so if you don't have them in hand, you can click on them, because I know some of the numbers were small, but all those documents are available on our website behind the school committee agenda tab.
Thank you, and the other corrected area is slide 25, so it says 7th there. Thank you.
Are we going to pose that as a question for Mr. Abrams, because he couldn't hear anything we just said?
I just wanted the public and the recordings to know that there was
Okay.
a difference.
Okay. Questions for the Abrams group?
Just the one question would be, with the projected increase to both Dudley and Charlton, would that take the school district out of the minimum aid category overall? Or is it just keeping up with every other district?
I think he said at that pace it would take us 5 years at that suggested pace. I think, maybe I heard it wrong.
Mark, the question was,
With the increases to Dudley Charlton assessments, will that have any impact on our Chapter 70 funding going forward?
Mark, were you able to hear the question?
No.
It's not,
Can you mute that again? I'll try it one more time.
Sorry. So the question was, with the increases to the assessments, will that have any impact on Chapter 70 standing, specifically as it relates to per pupil aid or minimum aid?
So keep in mind, the assessments are composed of A, the minimum local district contribution. We saw those numbers. That's the first step. The second would be transportation assessment. The third would be the excess of net school spending greater than the requirement. So repeat the question, Rich.
Would the increases in the assessments have any impact on the state calculation of Chapter 70?
Mark, can you hear me? Yes.
So
Requirement. Districts come up with their local contribution. It's matched by the Chapter 70 aid distribution, and that gives you the actual net school spending, which the state then compares that to the requirement. And that's what we came up with, the 12% excess in fiscal '22 as budgeted. Did you hear me, Rich?
Yeah, go ahead.
yes, we did.
So I think, through the chair, I think what Andrew was asking is, by making an additional investment in the override, or the additional investment in the local assessment, will that put each town in a position where they're now eligible to receive more Chapter 70 aid, the carrot and stick approach?
Like a Superman.
Yeah, John, that's right.
So Mark, the question comes down to is if the towns contribute more, does that affect Chapter 70? Meaning, does the state match the increase that the towns put in?
No, if the towns contribute more, it increases the actual net school spending of the region. And that then is compared to the requirement, and that would increase the excess. It wouldn't change the calculations of Chapter 70. You wouldn't get a match for Chapter 70 if you contribute more than the requirement.
And then, through the chair, then what's the benefit of trying to get out of minimum, Chapter 70 minimum requirement? There's no.
I heard that. The benefit is becoming a foundation aid community. The benefit is receiving Chapter 70 aid that would be greater than $30 or $60 per pupil.
How do we get there?
So as long as we meet that local contributions, then we can expect that 100,000 annually to go over or below? That's what I don't get.
Rich, can you repeat that?
If our contribution will at least meet, right, the requirement of that aid-based, then would that $100,000 increase or no?
The way the $100,000 would increase is getting a greater foundation budget. That's the starting point. The foundation budget is driven primarily by enrollment and inflation. The inflation factors have been very high the last few years. You're also benefiting from the Student Opportunities Act, which over the last 2 years has given you more higher foundation rates in the state's Chapter 70 formula. This translates into a higher foundation budget. Keep in mind that your enrollment has been declining, but your foundation budget has been increasing. Why? A, inflation, B, the Student Opportunities Act foundation rates. It would be nice if the enrollment could turn around and increase. Then you would see higher foundation budgets. What does that do? You subtract your local contribution from the foundation budget to derive Chapter 78. If the foundation budget grows, then Chapter 70 has to grow.
Got it, for you.
Clearer?
Yes.
I think the question that a lot of people are thinking about who may not be quant geeks, like a lot of us are, is let's just say hypothetically that we can fund that 3.7 million. Outside of benefits to the school district, to the students, get that. What does that translate to for additional state aid? I think that's what most people are trying to get at with these questions, that if we fully funded your 3.7 ask, which I can't promise, outside of just overall benefit to the budget, what does that mean for additional state aid to give us even more incremental to help the district? I think that's what a lot of people either at home or in the audience are thinking.
So it's independent of the Chapter 78 calculation. The foundation budget is embedded in the Chapter 70 legislation. It has many formulas. I would call that it's a target of spending and doesn't really reflect your true regional budget. But it's the same for everybody. So the state calculates the foundation budget and then moves on to calculate each municipality's ability to pay. Separate calculation. That's that target local contribution, the target share, local share. And then they make a subtraction. They subtract that contribution from the foundation budget to derive your Chapter 78. That's independent of what you spend. What you spend gets to actual net school spending, which the state then compares to the required net school spending.
Again, if I could, to be clear, for every dollar that the towns give, the state doesn't kick in another dollar. That's not how it works.
Yeah, it's the thing, and I suppose that's what I want to make sure everyone gets the point across.
Yes, yep.
That there is no magic bus coming that says if we do all this, suddenly there's this additional state windfall. That doesn't exist.
No.
It's still gonna be on our backs, and let's just be real honest with everybody about that. I mean, any type of incremental funding that we're gonna get from the state is gonna be marginal at best. If we wanna support our schools, which I think most people do, we're just trying to figure out by how much, because of all the other needs, it's still gonna be on the taxpayer's back. Let's just be completely candid about that.
Right,
If we start with that, everything else is a much easier conversation.
the only value that I see that could impact foundation moving down the road from my little seat right here is inflation right now, but the state does cap inflation for us, correct, Mark?
Correct. It's capped around 4.5%.
Thanks, Steve.
Even though the inflation rate is over 9%, I think, right now.
That is correct.
So the only real way to do it is increase enrollment.
Yes.
The only one way.
And we're down, what, 25% of the past,
22.
22?
That's bad.
22?
That was in the language, yeah. No, since '08,
So,
not 22 last year.
this isn't easy, folks.
Nope.
We gotta figure this out, but,
No.
like, this ain't easy.
Other questions for the Abrams Group?
Steve, I'm dying for your presentation.
I don't know if I can top the Abrams Group. We're lucky to have the Abrams Group here, so any other questions for them at all around school financing? Tax levies, tax ceilings, tax rates, no?
Actually, Steve, I'm gathering for you.
Yeah, go
Just a
ahead.
quick comment that, again, let's just be candid, because we all gotta figure this out over the next 4 months. The other elephant in the room is gonna be the MSBA. And, because when we think around tax levies, overrides, whatever terms that we're gonna use for how we're gonna fund this stuff, between the feasibility study and the eventual vote, I hope, on Shepherd Hill, that's gonna have its, I'm not gonna say may, it's going to have a significant impact on our taxes. So that's something else that we have to consider and not, and don't separate them out in a vacuum. So, again, that's not really a question of Mark and Matt, but rather of, Steve, I think as we're talking through your budget, I think all of us have to keep that in the back of our minds of what is this really gonna mean over the next 3-4 years?
Yep.
So, I'll get off my pedestal now.
Yeah, no, we touched upon it in my presentation, yes, yep.
Thanks, Kathy.
Great, thank you. Are we good to move on?
Okay? No other questions for the Abrams Group?
I think we're all set.
Thanks, Mark and Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to present.
Yep.
I'll give you a minute to set up, and then we'll move over to the presentation of the Dudley Charlton Regional School District Fiscal Year 24 Budget Overview. Mr. Lamarche, Superintendent Lamarche, sorry, Director Matthew, and Director Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We all set?
Yes, sorry.
No, I just want, I appreciate the opportunity to present a budget, FY24 budget overview. This has been a tremendous amount of work to try to get to this point. This has been looming for a while. We greatly appreciate, Mr. Matthew and myself, we appreciate the opportunities to work with the town administrators over all the years, but over the past years, looking at this and preparing for this FY24 financial concern that we have moving forward. So we appreciate all that work. We know that they work closely with their boards of selectmen, and we've been working with the school committee as well. So this evening's presentation, we're going to touch upon a couple of things. We're going to talk about relevant information with this overview, what is actually impacting this FY24 and what we're bringing forward. Then FY24 budget overview, and then we're going to touch upon the override in Dudley. And we have, working with Andrew, we know there's a huge impact on Charlton too. So when we use the word Dudley, we have Charlton right next to it. It's not absent from our understanding and preparation. So I want to be clear about that. So you see the slides, you see the ladder. It's either a choice of going down the ladder or up the ladder. That's kind of how it's being presented this evening, because we are going to present FY24, but we're going to talk about if the override doesn't come to fruition, what that looks like. Obviously, it's not something any of us want to talk about. There is nobody who's happy about it. There's nobody who's interested in the reductions that'll have to come forward if the override does not pass moving forward. So our budget process is, what I've been calling since the day I came here is 365. There's no budget season. We talk about a budget season. An actual budget is 365 days a year. It happens from today, it'll happen tomorrow. We'll still work on this tomorrow. This is not an end product. This will be, once the budget is approved on an annual basis, with or without the override, we have to keep working on it. Things emerge throughout the year. So it is a 365 process from my perspective as the superintendent for the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. We do have a budget and finance subcommittee that works on this stuff as well throughout the entire year. So this is just a 365 process. I wish we could just capture it in a season and just start it in November and just not think about it after town meeting in May. It's not that easy or simple when you're running a school district. We talk about continuous improvement. It was our responsibility to continuously improve our district at the same time, no matter what we have for finances. That has to be our goal. We can't stop looking at trying to be better as a district or improving what we do with innovation and supporting our staff to take risks and try to do the best they can for the students of Dudley Charlton Regional School District. We continue to do that. On an annual basis, we need to look at the risks and assessments that are always out there, and we'll share a couple of risks and assessments that we're identifying right now, but there are always more. But we will identify some of those. We'll talk briefly about the 3 Cs. That's part of our 365 process. We look at the 3 Cs on a continuous basis, and I'm going to give a couple of examples of how we've utilized those 3 Cs. And then we're going to touch upon capital improvements. We are extremely thankful for the communities to support the replacement of the roofs at our 2 middle school. We have had a season of rain. We've certainly seen the season of rain inside of our buildings at both Dudley Middle and Charlton Middle School. That project is on pace to be done this summer. It's going extremely well and on time. And watch any of our meetings. Mr. Matthew certainly reports on that, but things are really going well with those 2 projects, so really appreciate the support for those, and that will make a huge difference for the 2 schools, for the 2 buildings. So we're at this point, and it's not unusual for you as a Board of Selectmen or town meeting. This is typically in a town meeting booklet. Any citizen or anyone on this committee or anyone in our world can certainly identify, we want this in our budget. But we're at that place where if somebody wants something, they have to identify something that needs to be reduced. We're not sitting on reserves. We're not sitting in a place where we have, money waiting for an idea. It's not simply how it works. But just similar to town meetings, if somebody identifies a department or something else that they believe there should be a reduction in, you have to come up with an alternative to that. And so we're at that point as well with the work that we're doing here. So now we're going to cover some of the relevant information that I think is extremely important for you to understand with our overview. And the first one is, and you've heard this already through the Abrams Group, is that what's our assumptions and what are our risks? The first assumption is that we're going to be minimum Chapter 70 for next year. You did hear a glimmer of hope. We are hanging on that more than you. That in FY25 and FY26 that there could be an increase in foundation. Again, I think the one factor, yes, if we invest in our education, enrollment could increase. We've been stable for a couple of years, give or take a few students, but if the inflation factor gets changed a little bit, maybe there's an increase in Chapter 70 in FY25-26. I don't want to overemphasize that. Just know that I'm obviously paying very close attention to that with Mr. Matthew. We are predicting that excess and deficiency, which keep in mind that a regional school district can have excess and deficiency up to 5% of their budget. Dudley Charlton has never, ever reached 5% of their budget in E&D, ever. But we've tried to manage that in such a way that it offsets the next fiscal year. We are confident that, we are relatively confident. We're confident that it will be stable for FY24. If there is a failed override, I'm going to be clear, E&D is not going to be available in FY25. It's just not. We're going to have to use it for the failed override. But for FY24, we still believe it's in play to offset our operating budget. So that's an assumption at this point in time. If you've watched our meetings, we talked about big yellow bus transportation. We put that out. School committee had taken the extraordinary step of putting that out for a rebid. The bid gets opened on Tuesday of next week. We hope it lowers it's never going to lower the total cost of a 3 to 5 year transportation contract, but we hope it lowers the FY24 cost to us to help bring us down to a more palatable, never palatable, but a more appropriate request for FY24. School choice and charter assessments, I believe we had an increase of $100,000 last year. Last year, and so we hope that that's stable going into this year. We hope that was a high watermark for us, but that's an assumption at this point in time. And then we also hope that state reimbursements remain stable for the following year. That includes transportation reimbursement, circuit breaker reimbursement, Medicaid, and McKinney-Vento. We hope that those stay stable for the next year to help us, again, offset our operating costs. Please keep in mind that we do have a new governor, so there is a delay. There will be a slight delay in those numbers, which is why we're not able to completely scrutinize our numbers and finalize them to a degree. And the one example I'll give you that will be Mr. Matthew will talk about next week at the school committee meeting is we are already receiving word that the state-approved free lunch for this school year may be ending March 2nd of this year. March 2nd. So with shifts in the sand like that, there's changes for us fiscally as well. We hope that that's more stable. We need our legislators to really support an additional set of money for that. I don't think it was in the governor's additional expenditure requests. I'm not saying it exactly the way it's read, But supplemental budget that she put forward, it wasn't in that. The governor's pushing it on to the legislators to pass, but right now, we've received word and information that our free lunch for all students could be ending March 2nd of 2023. Just to give you how again, the shifting in the sands. And ESSER is stable for FY '24. So that's what we know. We know it's not there in FY '25, but it's stable, and our spending plan is stable for FY '24 at this point in time. So one of the things that I know I've talked about, especially at FinCom and other boards of selectmen, is the needs of our students continue to increase. I have to be clear, through our pandemic experience, those needs have compounded and have increased exponentially. And I'm going to ask Director Bergeron, who is Director of Pupil Personnel Services, to comment on it. And this is his slide of information that I would respectfully ask him to share with you.
Thank you, Supervisor Marsh. So as the short paragraph on the bottom of the slide kind of outlines, coming out of interrupted learning, that students who haven't had access to the supports they typically would through the school system. In addition, we have students who are unable to access the supports in the medical field outside the school system or early intervention, which services students from birth to age 3 in the state of Massachusetts. The result of that is a drastic increase in need we've seen in our student population here in DCRSD over the years. The graph on the top right outlines IEPs. I know it's an acronym. It stands for Individualized Education Plans. Those are plans that outline...
Excuse me, sorry. Steve, do you mind pointing the mic towards him, please?
Soft-spoken as it is. Oh, that's really close. Individualized education plans are documents that outline the supports that students who have disabilities require to make educational progress in school. So we could see just over 100 or about 100 increase in IEPs over the past 3 years. The number that is at that on the far right there, 649, is now closer to 660. Just this year alone, we've had over 160 initial requests for evaluations for students. Those requests come when students are struggling to make progress in school for a variety of reasons. So either parents or school staff refer those students for evaluations to see if they're eligible for special education supports. Our out-of-district budget, when we do not have the services that students require to make educational progress here in DCRSD, we are required to pay tuition so they attend schools elsewhere, out-of-district tuitions. That has increased from $2.6 million to $3.2 million. I would also note that the state has decided that out-of-district tuitions are eligible for increase of up to 14% next year. We are used to increases in out-of-district tuitions of about 2% per year. That's been more typical. A 14% increase is unheard of. That is going to result in over a $400,000 increase to our budget, just in that one line item. We've also seen an increase in students that need hospitalizations for mental health concerns here in the district this year. Unfortunately, that number of 16 is no longer valid. Since I've made this slide, we're now closer to 20, and we're only halfway through the school year. These are just some metrics to show the increase in student need that our staff are dealing with and working with students on a daily basis, and I hope everyone can kind of keep these increases in need in mind as we talk about budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bergeron. I apologize, when I put it to show, it only shows on that monitor over there. It doesn't show on the one behind us. So I'm going to leave it in non-slide mode. And I just wanted to kind of let you know what page we're on.
Page 8.
For those that are looking at it elsewhere, we are on page 8, going to page...
We're on 8, we're going to page 8.
We're going to page 8?
Yeah, that's page 8.
Okay. So now we're on page 8. So continuing with the presentation, thank you, Director Bergeron. Yes, even at our meeting this morning, we heard, it was pretty jarring, some of the stuff that we heard about what's the public schools are being held responsible for because other entities have delayed or not supported as they have in the past. We are truly it. I mean, we are responsible for the children in our district, and we will come forward and step forward for that. But there is a significant increase in our student needs, without question. So on this particular slide, I wanted to talk about the 3 Cs. The 3 Cs are important to us. This is, again, part of the 365. cost-saving initiatives, captured savings, and cost avoidance. Unfortunately, I think we spend a lot of time in cost avoidance. That doesn't help the operating budget, but it certainly helps project it forward. But when we look at cost-saving initiatives, I think the biggest one for our district that we continue to work on, and we really appreciate our associations as well, is the investment into the Mass Strategic Health Group, moving over the health insurance. We've had some very reasonable increases over the past couple of years because of that move. We are budgeting an increase this year, around 5% for that. But that has certainly been a cost-saving initiative for us as a district. Keep in mind, we are the largest employer in the two communities, and I think it's important to identify, and I do mention it somewhere else, we have over 300 retirees. I think what sometimes gets lost is, as a regional school district, we are like a municipality. We take care of everything for all of our employees over the years. So retirees, we're responsible for the health insurance of our retirees moving forward. Yes, we work with Medicaid, Medicare. We work with other agencies, but as far as a workflow, we are the people that are responsible for that, for our retirees. And those retiree numbers have, I want to say, in 4 years almost doubled, or at least 150 more than when I started here, as far as retirees in the work in our office, in our budget. So captured savings is somehow, how do we capture savings? And the example I'll give you this evening is, typically we go out to bid with like a consortium. We go out for supplies. We try to join that because usually there is a cost savings in the large number of entities that go out for that type of bid for something. So for example, this year, paper was extremely expensive this year when we went out for bid. The cost was very high in the bid, so we stepped back from the bid, and we actually, Mr. Matthew and his support staff, went out and found a lower cost for the paper, and we captured savings with that, cost avoidance, but all of the above. We didn't just take what people were giving us. So I just want to give you that example. That work continues on a regular basis. Cost avoidance, I think the best example for that is our over $400,000 in grants that Dr. Ackerman has brought in for high-quality instructional materials over the years. The district has needed to invest in early literacy and literacy, high-quality instructional materials at the elementary level. That's over a couple $100,000 for that on the state. The state supported us in that. That's cost avoidance. We didn't have to build that into the budget to try to make that work. And that's made a huge impact. And we did that during COVID. That process happened during COVID. We're seeing the results of that now, of that investment. But that's a form of cost avoidance. That's an expectation you have on us as a community, as boards of selectmen. I understand that, but I'm just trying to give you kind of what we go through and when we look at expenditures within our particular office. Keep in mind, our presentation today is what we know as of January 25th, last week, that horrible storm that you were all probably caught in. Just kidding, it was a nice rain event. But what we know, nothing's really changed for us because we don't have state numbers for February 1st, so it's really what we know as of today. And I know you're in the same boat. I did want to touch upon ESSER. We're often asked, what are you doing with your ESSER funds? We've talked about this every budget we've had, every budget we've gone through. We talked about what our ESSER ESSER funding is supporting. And keep in mind that we are setting ourselves up for a funding cliff with this particular grant. Next year is the last year of this grant. So in our budget, we're trying to move a couple of things over, but we have to really plan for what do we need and how can we move more over if we need it in FY25. That's at the front of our lobe at this point in time. But what is it actually paying for now? It's paying for 6 full-time paraprofessionals, 3 school adjustment counselors, 1 school nurse, our 18 to 22 postgraduate program teacher, a special education coordinator. With the grant, you have to put in retirement as well. So MTRS is Mass Teachers Retirement System. You have to contribute retirement out of the federal grant. It's paying for an occupational therapist, .4 Director of Public School Facilities, which has really been a huge plus for us as a district and for you as a community. He is acting as our OPM for the roof projects. By doing that, he is he's paying for his salary over the next several years as acting as the OPM for the 2 roof projects for us as a district. And then there's a required commitment, a certain percentage that's for interrupted learning. We have that dedicated towards a reading specialist at Dudley Middle School. That is also our investment into Wilson Reading which has, again, been instrumental in the progress of our students for literacy, Teach Town curriculum for our ILC classrooms, and also registered behavior technicians to help our students in need. So it has been a huge plus for our district, as it has for you and your communities, but it ends in FY25, so we have to begin thinking about the transition of what this looks like moving forward. But I know I'm asked that question quite often about what is the ESSER money going towards?
And Kathy, through you.
Yes.
It's probably not a surprise in this room that members of the Board of Selectmen get asked that same question of, so these were one-time revenues, and if those transition over the operating budget, especially if I'm looking at that number right, and it's $1 million, if that gets brought over next year, that's gonna be a big conversation that.
Without question.
Yeah, and so that's why I would implore the school committee to really, partner with us, partner with the town, try to figure out what's absolutely needed versus what's not.
Yes.
Because we hear a lot, the school hasn't added any heads. Well, when I look at the ESSER funds, yes, you have.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure our language is clear to both our respective towns.
Right.
Because then we get caught in the middle to how this works. And again, I have no problem with what you're doing on here. That's absolutely fine. It's just a matter of, you're right, it's going to be potentially $1 million ad next year that we got to get out in front of.
As it's designed today, yes, it's $1 million ad.
Yeah, as of today.
As of today, yes.
I mean, obviously that can change.
And without it in 2024, it would have, the ask would be 4.6 million.
Could, yeah, it could be, but we would still do our fiduciary responsibility to really determine I mean, it's hard to say any one of these should go, but we would be responsible for the budget and bring in a balanced budget to you. So yeah, for FY25, we certainly have to take a closer look at these positions. It's not easy to say, these individuals, I want to say 90% of them are aware that they're in the grant. So, but it's our job to determine what the district needs and how to make that work. But it is here for FY24.
Can I just, through the chair? So you're right with what you say, except the savings that we have by having the facilities director is $500,000 that we would have to come to the town and say it's additional to the roof needs if we needed to hire a project manager specific to that. So if we're gonna look at both sides, we gotta look at both sides of that. We gotta see that there's cost savings there of $500,000. That's a large cost savings that needs to go also recognized.
Oh, you can see a value on every single one of these. That's no type of question.
Agreed. It's hard to say today, yep, that one can go, this one can stay. That's not what this meeting's about, but it's very difficult, given the needs of our students that we're talking about as well.
I mean, I think that the difficulty is for all of us, that we always think, much like in business world, you manage quarter to quarter. Here, we manage year to year. But when we start talking on overrides for our friends in Dudley, when we start thinking about additional growth for us over the next few years, we try to project out 2 to 3 years to say, all right, based upon what we think's coming in on capital, sometimes you have to make decisions now because it'll be much worse to make the decision later. And again, that's probably a conversation for another day, but anytime I'm forward-looking, I'm really not trying to pick holes in things.
Yep.
It really is because Andrew and I talk a lot, along with Steve and the rest of the Board of Selectmen, around, so where are we gonna be in 3 years? And those are the types of questions that always come to the forefront. So again, I thank you for your indulgence.
And we certainly have talk about this funding cliff that's coming up, through our budget cycle this year.
Yeah, projecting is part of our work all the time. It's the same as you. It's not, there are a lot of movable parts, so, I mean, we're talking about a people business, so there are a lot of needs and things do shift, but projection is part of the work that we do. So at this point, I'm going to get into the budget overview, and then I'll go through a couple of things, and then Mr. Matthew will take over from a certain point with the budget overview. So as been shared, what are the costs? What's driving the $3.6 million, $3.7 million? It's simply bills. It's simply big bills, which we did not expect completely, because we thought if we were going to look for an override, what are the other fixes that we can put in our financial structures to make the district work better for the towns and the communities. One of those was E&D. Could we fix E&D moving forward so that we don't rely on a return on the budget lines to support E&D to offset the following budget? It's a cycle. It's a tough cycle, but that can't even fit into this at this point in time, because we're really looking at what are these numbers that are driving a $3.6 million request. The first is contractual obligations. This is for all of our employees in our district, again, being the largest employer in the two communities. We have $1.2 million just for contractual obligations moving forward into a fiscal year. And that's pretty close. It's anywhere between $1 and $1.2 million from an annual basis, on an annual basis. So that's always something. Now, we would obviously work as a district to try to see what we could absorb within our particular district. But, you know, we're really looking at a high watermark for this particular obligation moving into the next fiscal year. Transportation, we talked about transportation. The original one is now, it was where you see 400, that was originally $500,000. We're hoping with the new bids coming in next week, the first year, FY24, will be lowered by about $100,000 to help lower the ask for FY24. The plus $150,000 is for specialized transportation. That's the increase we have for specialized transportation or vans for students. So just transportation alone is $550,000. That's very close to a real number in every single way for us. We're hoping that, again, the big yellow bus, you know, if we can add 1,000 or take away 1,000, we'll know that better by next week. OSD, the Operational Services Division, OSD for the state, has, and we understand the need, everybody has needs. They permitted out-of-district placements for us, for our students with significant needs, to increase their budgets or their tuition rates by 14%. So that's just a reflection of a 14% increase to that line. That's not typically we like to budget between 3 and 5%, given the flexibility in there, but this is a 14% increase for those lines for us. That's $430,000. Unavoidable cost. Employee benefits and insurance, as I said, we have increased. Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Sorry.
Employee benefits and insurance, there's an increase in that. As you know, as communities, and Dudley has shared it as well, we're part of Worcester Teachers Retirements, Worcester Municipal Retirement System. There's an increase for them. Insurance, all of that, there's an increase to all of the benefits within our district. Line items, now this is very specific to utilities. I don't know if you've seen your electricity bills, but imagine 7 schools, 3,500, 3,600 students, over 700 staff members. That include substitutes, trying to manage and mitigate the high cost of utilities. We're trying to do everything we can. We have our computers set to shut off at a certain time. We are asking our staff to do things to be more conservative. Will we see a huge impact in that? I'm not sure. But it's still a very high cost for us, our utilities. We were very surprised with our first set of bills after we've entered a new contract because the other one ended. But it was very, very large. Instructional technology, the last real investment in instructional technology was a lease to purchase program that happened the year before the last override. The last payment of that was last year. So we are in a place now where we need another infusion of technology for our district. One of the main factors is next fall, Windows 11 will be a requirement. We have an extraordinary amount of devices that do not support Windows 11, so there will no longer be support for those devices. So we run the risk of not having devices at the same level we have them now. The $300,000 is, again, to enter a lease purchase program. It's not to buy technology outright for us as a district. A one-to-one environment would be unimaginable. But $300,000 gets us into a lease purchase a program. And then we talked about restoration, ESSER, deciding to transition from some positions because we have to do that. Otherwise, we're looking at a total of a $1 million change over moving forward, which we're not. So we're looking to restore a position in central office for us. We've gone without for somebody in that office, but that's a $45,000 hit to this. And then $105,000 for 2 other positions. That's continuing to move the facilities position over to the operating budget and also to move the one special education coordinator over to the operating budget as well. So again, the next slide represents what I was just talking about. What does the $150,000 represent? Our request to our building principals was much higher than what you see for other requests, but these are other requests that we've heard from other people. I think with Rich's calculations, I think all of our requests when we started this process were over $1 million. These are the ones that we continue to hear the need for. Another special education coordinator at the elementary level, a middle school foreign language teachers, a librarian at the middle school level, and then IT support. But those are crossed out because they're just not going to make the cut. They're just not. For FY24 projected budget, what does it look like? So for fiscal year '23, we did have an increase, and we really appreciate the community support in this, of 3.23%. This increased fixed, because we had increased fixed costs. We did talk about adding positions. We did add what we're considering regulatory positions, required positions for the needs of our students. We did not add positions for new programming, new innovations of that nature. So for FY24, looking at the $3.6 million, it's a 6.87% increase. And that is, the only thing that's new is a restoration of a position in central office and moving two positions, transferring positions from ESSER over to our operating budget at $150,000. And this is really a level service budget for us moving forward.
Kathy, through you?
Yes.
Sorry, Steve, I may have misheard you, so
No.
forgive me. Did you say one ESSER position or two?
Two. So the previous slide is $45,000 for district office support to restore a position that was lost last year.
Yeah.
And then add 105, which is two positions, starting the transition for them. So one is a total cost position, and actually one is a partial, they're both partial cost positions that we're moving over. We're not taking the full salaries and moving it over. We're starting the process.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And now we're going to get into the fiscal year 2024 override and what that looks like moving forward. This is really Mr. Matthews' bailiwick. Actually, no, I talk about the first couple of things, don't I? Yeah. I can't send it to him yet, so I talk about the first couple of slides here. So I just wanted to review the FY24, in FY24, what the 2019-20, because that was the start of it, what the override did for the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. We really appreciate this. It did provide the district with a $1.5 million increase in FY 2019 and also in 2020. What it also did is it did not increase the assessment for 2 years for the two communities. There was a slight assessment increase for Charlton in one of the years of, I think, around $60,000.
A little less than that, but yeah.
A little less than that in 1 year. But the district held to not increasing the assessment based off of that override from 2018. And again, that was a 2-year override. So what did that actually do? That provided $1 million for technology upgrades in all of our buildings. I was sharing with the administrators today what that really provided was wiring of our schools, because the wiring in our schools was really last done when we did Net Day as school districts, and none of my colleagues, administrators, knew what Net Day was. Net Day was back in the late 90s, where the communities came together with volunteers, National Guard, came in with drills, whatever donated Cat 5 wire at that time was provided, and they wired up all the schools. I did it myself. I was drilling places that I probably shouldn't have, but I was a volunteer. But that investment of $1 million helped us wire all of our schools and bring it up to date for wiring. What Mr. Matthews shares often in our meetings is that Shepherd Hill Regional High School did not have Wi-Fi until 2016. That was the first year it had Wi-Fi in the school. So technology is still one of those things that requires ongoing investment. The override also provided reduction, avoidance, and increased costs to support increased costs in operating budget. Again, as you see in this slide, anything that I've seen or heard or read about, it was really an override of survival. That's how it was actually presented to both communities. It was before my time. And it added a total of 4 positions. The $3 million added a total of 4 positions, 2 technology integration specialists, and 2 school adjustment counselors. Those positions are still intact within our district at this point in time. So once again, we do appreciate the support of the communities with the override. Another question that I'm often asked is, and you heard it today, in decreased enrollment, what have you guys been doing? This is what we've been doing since I've been here in FY '21. So up in the slide, you have FY '21 to '24, and I have the acronym, I have RACP. It's homemade by me. I consider it a Reclaimed Appropriation Control Program. I like acronyms. I've come from a world of acronyms, and I'm going to live in a world of acronyms. But what it is how do we capture savings over the years? These are positions that have been either reduced or not filled over the years. For example, I'll give you the first one, the district STEAM director. If people could remember, we had 2 district directors. They were combined to create 1 assistant superintendent. So there was a cost savings of around $60,000, $70,000 just for that, creating that position. So we lost a position by doing that, and there was a cost savings to that. So you have all over the years, we've lost 16.4 full-time equivalent positions of over $1 million. But that's not it. Since I've been here, all of our supply lines have been level funded. Since I've been here, there hasn't been an increase in those. And our technology and teaching supplies, technology supplies have also been level funded since I've been here.
If I may, we've also had a reduction in our bus fleet. We're down to where we're basically at the bare minimum that we need to cover the square footage of both communities in the timeframes that we have.
But as you've heard, there's no cost savings there. So, but we have decreased our bus fleet since 2019 by, I think, close to around 7 buses. So right now with the 3.6, school committee has a goal to maintain class size. Right now with the 3.6 request, there is no reduction in class size for that budget. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
And, sorry, what's the current class size on average?
Around 22.
22, thank you.
Yep. So as we look at the 3.6 on the left-hand side, what happens if the override does not go through for the community of Dudley, and we get the support of Charlton as well? That means that we are looking at a reduction of $2.7 million for our budget. Why is it $2.7 million and not $3.6 million? It doesn't include, it removes technology investment, so that's several $100,000, and it doesn't include utilities in there. So we have to figure out a way to pay for those. But paying for the utilities will almost guarantee there will be no or limited E&D for FY25 for the following year. And again, we reinvest over $1 million from E&D back into our operating budget to balance the budget. We will, as a district, clearly move to a more strict required compliant district. Right now, our staff and our administrators have been working extremely hard to meet all of our students and their needs. That includes not only what we're required to do, but it also means the things that are in the middle. So you'll hear us talk in education jargon about Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. This really removes any transitional tiers that are in there, because those are supports that have fluidity to them. To us, they're required. We have to meet the needs of our kids, but with the $2.7 million reduction, how do we get to $2.7 million? So we would have to move clearer to more of a compliant required district versus the stuff that our students we believe always need moving forward. We are going to provide you a list of administrative recommendations for reductions on how to meet $2.7 million, because we are obligated as a school district to build 2 budgets this year, one with the possibility of an override and one without an override. So what that will actually look like. And then we're going to look for school committee guidance on the next items to reach $2.7 million, because as an administrative team, we reached a plateau of what we could actually reduce as a district. And quite simply, it's devastating. I use the word devastating because what I mean is it will simply change the way we educate students in Dudley Charlton if we have to cut $2.7 million out of our operating budget. It will simply change the way we educate our students and the experience for our students. So the district office administrative team and principals have worked extremely hard through several meetings to identify areas. I'm not going to be granular in this. This is what our overall picture looks like. The granular work takes time, and we have to be very methodical with that. It's not something we could simply put on this list, with the exception of a couple of items that you may have seen in the past or you may have heard. So these are our recommendations to get to at least $2.1 million in reductions for the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. One would be district office staff. We've already said that we're trying to add another district office staff. It has been shared that the level of staffing in our district office today is the same it was in the 70s. It's the same. In the 80s, it's the same. So we would have to, again, we're fair game in this. We can't ask for reductions in all of our buildings and not look at district office as well. So we would really be working hard to try to meet the needs of our school district as a district office if we had to reduce $330,000 out of our district office, which includes a gentleman sitting here this evening, the assistant superintendent. Shepherd Regional High School has identified potentially 8 full-time equivalent positions for reduction. The middle schools have identified 7 full-time equivalent positions and a recommendation of middle school athletics. Elementary schools have identified 8 full-time equivalent positions in the library assistants. And special education has identified today 5 full-time equivalent positions. But please keep in mind that that is fluid and volatile. That could be easily a +5 by the time we finish this process. But as of today, for what we know. So therefore, to get to $2.1 million, we are recommending 31.4 FTE totals, a reduction to the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. So there's a balance of $580,000 still to meet the reduction of $2.7 million. So again, as I shared, the administrative team came to a standstill because all of these impact every level of teaching and learning, every level of the experience of our students, and we're going to look for guidance from our school committee as to where to go. And we'll take your input as well from boards of selectmen in the community moving forward with this. Now the value to reach is $580,000 to get to 2.7. Not all of these are a value of 580. Some of these exceed. We could certainly take, as it is stated in there, singular. One of these is 1. We could take accommodation. We're going to look for direction, again, from our school committee, who is the budgeting authority for our school district. Do we increase class size from our current 22 to 24, 27? Do we move to half-day kindergarten, which to me is, I mean, nobody's going to be happy about any of these. Nobody's excited to put these on a list. Nobody wants to talk about them. I'm the first to talk about them. This is obviously uncomfortable for me. It's guaranteed to be uncomfortable for others. Eliminate Shepherd Hill Regional High School and middle school activity stipends for all non-athletic and music programs.
Could you share what that means? Because I think for some parents, they may think that it means like what they would need to pay, but it really means that we would not have any.
It's not a fee-based program, but it is some of the activities we have after school, which could be clubs, activities, things that our students are able to access and experience at our schools. Minimal at the elementary level, more so as you build into the middle school, and clearly at the high school, clubs and activities. If this is, I know this came up a couple of years ago, but cutting kindergarten assistants, again, none of these are palatable, none of these are easy to discuss. Eliminate department heads at Shepherd Hill Regional High School. It's a value of roughly $249. This is because of the stipends. Also, departments have 1/5 of their schedule available to be assigned classes, and it could also reduce an additional Shepherd Hill Regional High School teacher if that was done. It doesn't mean that the work doesn't go away. It means that the administrators take on more work in that building. Eliminate Shepherd Hill Regional High School and middle school music stipends for all of our music programs. And then either eliminate Shepherd Hill Regional High School and interscholastic athletics. Again, not one of these is acceptable by anybody. We know that. But how do we get to $2.7 million in reductions? So the administrative team took the position not to identify one of these, but to look for guidance from our school committee as to what could be identified to reach $2.7 million in reductions. And I know that's not a discussion for this evening, but it has to be presented.
Kathy, I have a foundational question. I'm not sure who to address it to be honest with you.
I think it was probably gonna.
Rich, maybe?
Probably.
Rich, help me and maybe the audience understand this. So you're asking for 3.6 roughly this year, right? How are we not back in the same position next year then? Because are you assuming that that incremental cost will stay down?
Yeah, so in a normal year, we have obviously salary increases,
Right.
contractual increases there. But in looking at the list of other increases, the 14% that was authorized by, for out-of-district tuitions is abnormal. And that's definitely a one-year hit. Compare and contrast that to the state only allowing 4.5% inflation factor, but that's neither here nor there. The transportation increase for next year is simply because we had to go out to bid. We're at the end of our contract. So in future years, we dictate in the bid itself that there's a 4% increase each year going forward. So we know what that cost would be after that. The employee benefits and insurance, I hate to say it, but Worcester Regional is going to continue to increase for all of us. We're all parties here are members there. Health insurance, we're facing larger than past increases right now. There are a couple of specific cases that are very expensive and being self-insured, even inside of the Mass Strategic Health Group, mandate that we have a higher increase there. We're lucky because if we weren't part of Mass Strategic Health Group, when we were going back out to bid for our stop-loss reinsurance, I could guarantee that the increase to rates would be double digits, and it might not start with a 1, in all honesty, based on some of the cases.
I suppose my concern, I'm sorry to interrupt, my concern quite candidly is that even if we somehow get this done this year, do the townspeople get a guarantee that we're not going to have this conversation again next year and say, hey, by the way, our forecasting was off, for good reason, because we all do it, but your estimates were off, and that override you just passed, yeah, that's not enough for this year, so now we have to go back to making cuts. Again, I'm just being candid, because I know people are gonna, if I'm thinking it, someone else is thinking it. Because if 3.6 basically maintains, plus a little slug, to bring some people over, if 3.6 maintains it, fiscal year 25, you're talking about $1 million, potentially, that a cliff, plus any other macroeconomic factors that still may be in play. Is that 3.6 even enough? Because I don't want to, again, this isn't directed at anybody, I don't want to have this conversation with our residents again in a year or two if we go to bat for this. So I don't want to say I'm looking for assurances, but what's your confidence level that we're not going to have this conversation again if this passes, again, big if, in the next year or two?
So just continuing on here, the line items for utilities, we're locked into a 2-year contract. What's going to happen, in November of 2025, I can't sit here and guarantee, but I don't think anybody expects that electricity rates are going to continue to climb. There's no expectation of that from the experts that monitor the markets, and there's certainly a hope from everybody that uses electricity that they'll go down at some point in time. The instructional technology, we absolutely need to continue to build that department up and provide infrastructure there. So not all of these costs are going to be repeatable next year. Is that to say that we're not going to have students that move in that require specialized services that we're not able to provide? No, nobody can sit here and make that guarantee.
Like I said, I'm sorry, just for my own clarification, because.
No, it's a great question, because you'll see at the end of the slide, we're going to talk about a 1-year override and a 5-year
I keep jumping
override.
ahead, Steve, I'm sorry. I gotta stop talking.
No, don't, I'm just.
22 and 23 for the slide deck.
Thank you.
No, it's okay. It's a great question. We would rather you ask the question
I'm
when
gonna
you think
jump
about
ahead,
it.
you know what, catch up to me, you'll be all right.
Because we don't want to go back to the taxpayer either. We don't want to go back to you.
I'm sorry, we don't like these increases.
Oh, I get it.
We thought this was going to be not quite a normal year where, we're looking at ideally a 3% budget increase, going back out to bid for transportation. But it's shocking, those numbers that, when we opened the bids, there was one bid that was $1 million more than our current budget. I have no clue what the thought process was there. So there absolutely is no guarantee, but there's no expectation of increases, and if there were, we would have presented them.
Okay. Sorry, thank you. I'll go back to page 22.
So, once again, we're looking at an increase of, a decrease of $580,000 that we need more guidance on to determine where to land, because, again, there isn't one of these, even the slide before, the ones that administrators are recommending, they're going to be difficult to live with. But these really impact, as I said, I use the word devastating, but it really impacts and changes the way our students will experience Dudley Charlton Regional School District. So, the next slide is a reiteration of the slide that I already shared with you that talks about devastating. Just a reminder about E&D, the reason why it's $2.7 million. It doesn't include technology, it doesn't include utilities, and that we are really moving towards what's required and compliant, which is a horrible place to be. And so now I have the privilege to turn this over to Mr. Matthew for the next several slides.
So just to talk about the potential impact on the Dudley side of the override and the considerations involved here. Again, the number that we have at this point in time is roughly $1.8 million, pending the final state numbers, or the initial state numbers, I should say. If we were to look at a one-year only override, it would not address the annual assessments after FY24. It truly would be just for that 1 year, and it would not address the Shepherd Hill MSBA, Mass School Building Authority feasibility study monies that would be required to proceed in that project, which would potentially reimburse the two towns 50 to 60% of the cost of renovations at Shepherd Hill. If we were to look at a 5-year override in Dudley, again, the value would be roughly $4.8 million for the regional school district portion. It would provide approximately $1.8 million for FY24 and $750,000 of annual support for assessments going forward on the Dudley side. It should address the assessments for the 5 years. It would, based on that number, include funding for the Shepherd Hill Mass School Building Authority feasibility study. And the balance of the override for FY24 would be applied to the capital projects assessments that were already approved, that was approved in September of 2022. And that would be a way of basically, instead of financing it over the course of 15 years, paying it all at once, but also solving the ongoing problem on the Dudley side. On the Charlton side, I guess it's up to the Board of Selectmen and FinCom members as to whether or not you need an override. I know that is not a popular word, so I'm not sitting here saying that, trying to suggest that in any form or fashion. But the projected increase to assessment for next year is $1.9 million. Again, very sizable. That number would not include the feasibility study monies. And if Dudley were to successfully pass the 5-year version of an override, then Charlton's future assessments would be higher than they have been in the past few years as well. And then the last two slides are the revenue and assessments projections. These were put together with the Abrams Group's numbers as they originally had them. They do have some updated numbers, but again, these are projections. These are rough estimates. They are not to be taken as gospel. Until we have the numbers from the state, these are going to be in flux. Once we have those numbers from the state, then we can have definitive assessment information. We don't know if regional transportation is going to get cut or increase. I think we're pretty sure about where Chapter 70 is headed, but there are other factors involved as well that will have some play here. So the bottom line really is as Superintendent Lamarche said, devastation. And the reason for the dramatic decrease is, as I understand it from Dudley, the worst-case scenario, if the override were not to pass, whether it's a 1-year or a 5-year, we'd be looking at level funding in terms of our assessment from you, from FY23 to FY24. That would translate, give or take a little bit, to level funding from the Charlton side. So if we have level funding at 50% of our budget and a $100,000 increase in the other 50% of our revenue budget, we are not looking at a huge budget increase. We're basically looking at not a level service budget, but a level funded budget. And there's no way, the cost increases that we're looking at are to pay bills. If we were talking about $4 million of new programs, then we could sit here and barter what's good, what's bad, how do we get to $2 million, how do we get to $2.5 million, how do we get to a different number? All of these things are basically, again, just keeping the lights on, keeping the doors open. And I've got to say, in my going on 8 years here, I'm incredibly disappointed that we have to bring these numbers to you at this level. Again, if we were talking $2.2 million, yeah, it's a little higher than we wanted to be, but everybody understands where the economy is at. These are staggering numbers. There's no doubt about it. But they're not paying for new things. They're paying for things that already exist. They're paying to keep the things that we have. They're to pay bills.
So the last slide is next steps. School committee is meeting next Wednesday. I'm confident there'll be more discussions about FY24, and we look forward to guidance from our school committee. Then we are scheduled now to have a March 8th school committee budget hearing. We hope to have state numbers at that point in time, but that's an assumption. There's a risk that it's not going to be there. We are going to respectfully ask school committee to set up one more budget workshop before that meeting so that we can continue to work on the fiscal year 24 budget. Right now, it is scheduled for April 25th, a ballot vote for the town of Dudley. The details have not been completely ironed out yet, but April 25th is a target date for that.
April 25th, and we'll get to our budget hearing.
We'll ask the selectmen to vote to put that override question. Right now, I'm going to recommend 5-year override question on that ballot for April 25th.
And you need to know in early March.
March 11th or 21st?
21st, I believe you indicated, was the drop dead time.
Right. We'll have to have the best number you have at that point.
And then in May, we have town meetings, annual town meetings, and we'll go from there. So this presentation this evening, this overview, it was our hope that people would have a better understanding as to where we're coming from, what we're working through and trying to figure out for the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. It's not a happy event. It's not intended to be a positive walkaway. It's a reality for us. It's something that Mr. Matthew and I are working on for a year now. And we, again, town administrators, we've been working on for quite a while. Did we have the exact numbers? No. Every time Mr. Matthew and I would meet, I recall the days where where everything all of a sudden cost $5. Everything all of a sudden cost $10. You always needed a $20 bill in your pocket. Every time Mr. Matthew was coming in, it was $100,000. This is increasing by 100. This is, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nothing was under $100,000, and it was just blowing us, both of us away. With what we were getting back, and the example that Mr. Matthew gave of that 3 bids for transportation, one was $1 million increase. We thought there was something wrong there, but that's. As I said in my email to all of you, the public-facing entities have dealt with a lot over the years, and it's bubbling up. The increased wages of bus drivers is bubbling up. It's going to impact all of us. So I hope that there was a better understanding for all of you this evening. We clearly have more work to do. As a committee, we have more work to do. We do have to present 2 budgets to you as a community, one with a $2.7 million reduction and one with a $3.6 million level service increase budget. We have to present those to you. Once again, this is troubling for all of us. Nobody has an easy stake in this. Nobody is walking away with relief. We can all walk away as champions from this if we were able to figure this out. And we don't want to go back year after year. We don't. That's not the goal here. The goal here, we thought, was to, as I talked about earlier, was to repair some of the fiscal structures that are in place. Again, Charlton's had increased revenue, Dudley's working on that, but how do we, change the financial structure of all of this? And the example I gave you was E&D. How do we get out of that a vicious cycle of E&D? We're not able to do that here, but we're hoping that this is a solution for the time to come, for years to come. This is tough news this evening, and whether you're here tonight or you're watching at home or listening, or you'll see it tomorrow or something of that nature, or you'll talk about it in the schools, this is going to have a ripple effect. But saying that, the one thing that I've come to learn in Dudley Charlton Regional School District is the exceptionalness of our staff and our educators. It will not change what they do from day to day with their students. It will be in the back of their mind. It'll be in the front of their mind. Again, it will be at the water cooler. It'll be in the copy room. It'll be by the shredding machine. It'll be everywhere. But what they provide to you as a community for your students and your children won't change through this process because of their dedication and your investment in them. As I've shared in previous fiscal year budgets, the district has done extremely well investing in educators and teachers in the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. So they will continue that work. But again, the impact is going to be real for them because the two things that bother all of us is anticipation. If you're the last person to speak in a room of 50 people, by the time it gets to you, I don't care who you are, there's still some level of anticipation that may spin you a little bit. And then the unknown, not knowing where we're going to actually land, not knowing what the Board of Selectmen are going to do, what school committee is going to do, what the voters are going to do. Those unknowns will wreak havoc with people, but we need to work together and be steadfast on trying to do what's best for Dudley Charlton, for the regional school system, also the community of Dudley and the community of Charlton, and continue to work together on this. So that's why we greatly appreciate you coming this evening and listening to the Abrams Group presenter on nuts and bolts around financing for municipalities as well as the school system, and also listening to what the Dudley Charlton Regional School District has to actually continue to work on and refine in granular detail for us as a district, and what that impact will mean for every child in Dudley Charlton. So I'll turn it over to the chair, but for any questions that may be asked as well.
I want to commend the school committee and the administration. This was actually really helpful, and it was like, honestly, everyone did a really nice job. This is really good for everybody. First question, Rich, can you educate me on the 1 year versus 5 year override process? I've just never heard it phrased that way before. Like, what's the underlining meaning to it? Because, I mean, are you saying after 1 year that the taxes fall off? Or, like, so both for me and probably like a fair amount of people, can you explain what you mean by that? First, and then I have a quick follow-up.
The goal, when we started talking about an override last year, was to provide a sufficient increase to Dudley's operating revenues that would allow us to have, again, roughly a 3% type budget increase year after year. Okay, so, just as we did in the override in 2018, where that first year you received that full assessment of the $3 million, but half of it was basically for capital, the wiring projects. And then that capital money in the second year turned into operating money. The same concept would be true for the 5 year approach in Dudley, again, paying for a lot of the capital stuff right up front, almost all of it. And then, yes, in the second year, there actually would be a decrease in the amount of taxes assessed, gradually building back up, so that in year 5, it was at that, that level, that same level as 2024.
So the tax increase isn't actually permanent then?
It's permanent, but the ability to tax versus the actual taxes would have a sizable gap in FY25 and then gradually decrease.
All right. I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of confused about that, so I may talk to you offline.
That works.
And the second, oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
I have the same questions for year 6. There's no sunset provision for what was done the other schools 6 years ago. And I'm wondering how this factors in, going back to a couple of the other questions. I don't want to be the pessimist in the room, but the 6% increase for health insurance that Dudley has, I'm on the executive committee for the trust, and I'm shaking my head saying, what is that second year going to look like? And I can't imagine that the health insurance is going to be immune to, there's a dark cloud in the future. There's a great deal of inflation and what have you. So in the big picture, if you had a one-year correction, you could point to one-time increase in taxes, we got those paid, and it got us a little closer where we should have been. But if this ends after year 5, what happens on year 6, it's almost a funding cliff if you're only running for a 5-year. That's my thought, because the thought was, short of a major economic boom in the town of Dudley, this was the way to go through and get the schools funded, because the first part of the presentation started to talk about wealth factors and equalized valuations. Really tough to get a town to blossom in a year or two, so the idea was we could increase taxes. Dudley has low taxes. That was the #1 place to get things moving. And it's the right direction. The question is it 1 year, 5 years, or does it go on in perpetuity?
The override will permanently affect the levy limit.
Right.
I think the hope was that in the 5 years, there would be economic development in town, which would provide, sufficient revenues going forward. But I really can't speak to, to what economic development, was presumed, for, in that time frame.
Rich, you're on the same page with me on this one.
Right. I mean, I'm here to advocate for doing things right. I don't want to hear that we're going to cut the kindergarten, and I think we're all on that same page. The idea is, if you're increasing taxes for 1 year or 5 years, we're not going to have increased revenues that are just going to ski jump higher.
Guarantee against that.
Right. Pardon?
I don't think they could guarantee that either. But
We, as Mr. Matthews said, we don't have a crystal ball for 6 years.
Right,
For the community of Dudley or Charlton. And the only thing I would add in there too is that we may have been at the table earlier if it wasn't for the pandemic. And this was discussed after the override in 2000. That was discussed as, and I know that there's still some issues as to whether that was a 2 or a 3, but let's even call it a 3-year override. We're 6 years later. So that was already set up as, this isn't gonna work, we're gonna have to come back to the table at some point in time. That was already set up. So in 6 years, we may have to come back to the table and work together again, but we don't have a crystal ball for 6 years.
I guess the question would be the logic in making it a permanent override or an increase. And I know that's the purview of the Board of Selectmen, but we're here as a group.
Well, no, I think that's the intent, is to
Right.
make it an override.
An override with,
Stays.
so what's the 5-year component on
I
that?
think maybe 5-year was through the chair, that 5-year, at least we're looking at a situation projecting 5 years out that we won't have to come back to the table. I don't know that we could come up with a in perpetuity override where we would never have to have this discussion again that would ever pass or stand a chance of passing. But I think 5 years was more of a target than I would hope, I'm certainly doing it on the municipal side, but I would hope that the district 5-year number is the actual at least 5 years before we have this discussion again number, as opposed to 3 and hopefully 5 when everybody's out of money, we'll talk about this again. But I think we probably assigned a 5-year imaginary number, we used 5 years as a target, that we would not have to have this discussion again, because I don't think it's palatable beyond 5 years. We don't know we don't know what's gonna happen in year 6. We don't know what the economic condition of the town, either town, is gonna be. So I think we had to choose a palatable number that would work at least 5 years, and ask the voters to approve that number, because how do we predict a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old? And how does that ever have stand a chance of passing?
And just for clarification, I heard a couple times tonight that, well, you know, Charlton's seen some and witnessed some really good revenue growth. No one sent us a check yet. We see the building, we think it's there, right? But we haven't cashed a check yet.
We live in this community too.
You're right.
Oh.
20-year tips are an interesting way to check revenue.
Yeah. And just my follow-up, and this one's real quick, I promise, and then I promise I'm done. So right now, we're looking at binary. We're looking at 3.6 million increase, 2.7 decrease. In all seriousness, because someone's gonna ask this question of us, how come there's nothing in the middle? To say, you know what, let's just increase by like $1 million, knowing that you still, I'm obviously making up numbers, like, or X number in the middle, knowing there may have to be, at least for 1 year, cuts, but then maybe next year is a different story. So I suppose that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, right now it's being, look, we project everything out 3.6, everything stays the same roughly, or basically it's the apocalypse. Why isn't there anything in the middle to have both communities have a discussion and say, could we live with that? And I'm not honestly, sorry, I'm not sure whom to address that to.
Well, that's kind of the way you did it last year, right? You had the 3 silos. It was like an
Simply
à la carte.
because, as I indicated before, my understanding from the town of Dudley is that we're looking at level funding for FY '24 if the override fails. So it's not like Dudley saying, oh, you know, it's level funding, but we can give you an extra $500,000, which would allow for a $1 million type increase for us.
I suppose, let me rephrase, why aren't we asking for a smaller increase, knowing for a fact that will, or maybe a smaller override from our colleagues in Dudley, as opposed to, and again, I don't want to speak for, for Dudley, obviously, but I'm just trying to understand why it's even 3.6 at level funding, or it's 2.7, I'm sorry, for level staffing for next year versus level funding at 2.7. How come there's nothing in the middle that says, yeah, there's gonna be a smaller override or increase from Charlton that'll have a negative impact, but it's not gonna be quite as draconian? Can anybody answer that?
I think we're talking about level services, not
Level
necessarily-
services
Yeah,
for the 3.6.
right.
2.7 sounds like level funding. I suppose my question is, how come there's not something in between that?
I think to go in between, you have to go for the override, right?
yeah,
So you're
yeah.
asking why did we pick that number instead of going
Instead of
in between?
1.7, why, or like, let's say 3.6 all in, why didn't you, again, I'm making up a number, why not 2.4 all in? Knowing Dudley might still have to pass an override, and we could probably handle it on our side a little bit easier.
Right.
So I'm just trying to see why there wasn't more discussion around that. I mean, and I really
That
don't know.
already-
I mean, I'm not trying to be funny. I really
That
don't.
already means that we'd be losing services.
Agreed.
And
But if
so
the
we're
override
telling you
fails-
that we are already at bare services now, and we'd be losing that. We'd be losing from that. So that is a direct impact to our students.
But by asking for 3.6, because I know the people in Charlton are asking me that, by asking 3.6, if it doesn't pass for whatever reason, just the budget in general, if it doesn't pass for any reason,
Right,
you guys get decimated.
we do.
So why is there not a third option? Knowing that, yes, it will be a hit, yes, there will be cuts. But why is there no discussion about a third option that might be more palatable, even though it will be painful to students and parents? Completely understand that.
Right, so in essence, you're talking about that first list, administrative recommendation, and identifying on that list, where is the middle ground on that?
For all intents and purposes, yeah.
Yeah. So next week, the school committee's meeting on February 8th. You're welcome to attend, and I'm sure that there'll be some discussions around that.
Let's be honest.
No, but I think can I just
Yeah.
ask, like, we've been in conversations, you've been in conversations with the town administrator and Ruta to talk about what numbers would work well.
Yeah. But to Bill's point, can we come up with a number that's hurts us, but it's palatable for the taxpayer. That's basically what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
that's the question, yeah.
Yeah.
Knowing it's absolutely gonna hurt you. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But it won't destroy the district.
Yeah, so it's a good question. We'll have
Just,
to-
again, just something to think about.
Yeah,
I'm not saying I support it, I'm just saying it's just something to think about.
Yeah, and I would think that we would need to work with the town to talk about what number that would be. Because I don't wanna start making huge cuts without having a conversation with the Board of Selectmen to say, what is that ability for the town to actually handle,
Absolutely.
right? Because the second you start making big cuts, then your enrollment goes down, which means our aid's gonna go down. Like, so I think we have to find where that nice equilibrium number is.
Mr. Borowski, I think you're jumping ahead a page. in
Again?
essence.
Seriously?
Again, seriously, yeah.
I look forward to additional conversations about this. I mean, you guys are in a tough spot, I get it, I really do. We're all in a tough spot, so.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
all of us.
yeah. I mean, we gotta partner on this somehow, so.
I think,
You got anything?
I don't know about the other school committee members, like, before our next budget meeting, if you and Steve were, like, Steve and Rich, if you were able to meet with the town, or we can meet as well, to just kind of figure out what is the magic number that you believe an override's gonna pass? Because I don't wanna start cutting positions, because every time we meet and we start cutting things haphazardly, like,
again, respectfully, that would require a crystal ball to know what the taxpayer will be palatable, 3.6, 2.6, 2.1, it's,
So let me just, through the
thank
chair.
you.
The town of Dudley is also asking for a municipal override as well.
Yes.
And part of the mistake we made, and I'm gonna accept responsibility for it, because I was a member of the Board of Selectmen when we did the first one, and it passed, is that we didn't address our municipal needs. We addressed the school assessment and the school assessment, and we kept making the same mistake for the past 5 years. Defer maintenance, ignore regulatory and compliance, just keep cut. So the common ground that we'd love to get to, and our ability to absorb that decreased number for a five-year override is really, it's not there. The capacity is not there to absorb it. We're asking all departments in Dudley to cut 10%. We're gonna have to infuse stabilization if the override fails. And regulatory and compliance, we're gonna be right back to where we were. So, boy, I understand where you're coming from on your side. It's, whatever we go up, you've gotta meet that number, and it would be nice to have a happy medium, but, our municipal side needs to be addressed.
And again, just to repeat, if we were including new programs in here, then obviously, we could put those on the table and say, but if we're talking about the override, we might as well pay all of our bills in the initial discussions there. If it turns out that, no, that number is just completely not acceptable, then we have to go back and say, what can we live without? How can we lower that number? But right now, we're talking about just paying bills.
I just would like to say again, we've gone back and said, what can we live without? And we've cut. And you can see that the numbers changed from when we met in Dudley to when we met today. And I think it went down, help me, 0.5. $500,000?
Yeah.
Thank you. I said it wrong, but $500,000. And so that conversation has been continuous, and it isn't lost on us, but when there's nothing left to cut, there's nothing left to cut.
And what was our total amount that we cut last year? That we ended up cutting?
Well, we were hoping to get around a 4% increase and ended up with a 3.23% increase. So I want to say there were 8 staff total.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Kathy, nice job on this.
Yeah, no, thank you. We did not address the other issue about Shepherd Hill. And I just want to make, part of what we talked about as a school committee was being transparent with our voters, with our selectmen, and we didn't talk, we talked about the MSBA, but we didn't talk about what happens for our taxpayers if we get chosen, if we are able to go through the process and build or renovate Shepherd Hill. So I think
Well, it's preliminary to understand what that would be at this point in time.
Okay.
You did see in the slides a recommendation for a feasibility study of around $1 million. I've done my research with MSBA and others like communities, and Monday is a next Shepherd Hill School Building Committee meeting, and I'm recommending a $1,000 feasibility study, which is. $1 million. I'm sorry, $1,000 sounds even.
That would be great. Here.
We get free cash for that,
Yeah,
man.
you can have it.
So many numbers. $1 million, which is on the lower end of districts that have gone through what we've gone through. But it's still, it fits with our community, and I think it's the right recommendation for us, so.
Oh, so we get reimbursed some of that too?
We get reimbursed, and that would come back on the assessment. Yep. So that's the next step, and that can be a 2-year process. Feasibility can be a 2-year process, so it may not happen, in 6 months for us to come back at the table for MSBA, and what that looks like, and that's really a heavily involved community engagement project. It's not something that we would work on in isolation.
Okay. Good. Did we answer all your questions?
And then some.
What you have? Okay.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Yeah, no, thank you for taking the time.
I just want to reinforce for anyone who, anyone in this room wants to, or others that want to meet with Mr. Matthew or myself, schedule an appointment with us, and we'll try to, dig in and talk about it more, so feel free to do that. And I know that we, at some point in time, will be attending your meetings, but again, we're available if you want to connect with us and meet with us to talk about this further. Okay.
Great. Does anyone have anything further before we take a recess? And I will hand it over to you if you'd like to adjourn your meeting.
Motion to adjourn. Bosh, I need a second.
I second. Okay.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, school committee members, well done.
Yes,
Thank you.
We're going to take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll go back to our regular meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's okay.
All right, we have 2 more items on our agenda. We're going to go into the, wait a second. Okay, we're going to go into the request for additional staff. Director Bergeron?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Following on the theme of increased student need this year, we have had multiple students move into the district that require one-to-one paraprofessional support throughout the school day. At the same time, we've also seen an increased need in our pre-K ILC program. The numbers of students served by that program has exceeded regulatory compliance. So I'm here tonight to ask for 4.0 additional FTE paraprofessionals to meet the need of both the move-in students as well as to support the addition of the ILC classroom. The additional 0.5 ILC classroom at Charlton Elementary School, to be specific.
Okay, do I hear any,
So
do I hear a
moved.
motion? Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Great, we'll open up discussion. Ms. Terry, do you want to go first? You said this motion, so.
Oh, I don't have anything to ask.
Okay. Does anyone have
I'm
any?
sorry, who's the motion? Sorry.
The motion is to approve.
No.
I made it.
Terry, second? Yes, thank you.
Just to confirm, this is just to put us in compliance?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd also like to mention that we're opening an additional that 0.5 classroom at Charlton Elementary School. We have a teacher there who is very graciously flexing her job this year and taking on that, and one of the paraprofessionals is going to cover her in-class support. So I'm very grateful to that teacher for taking on this challenge halfway through the school year, because otherwise I'd be coming to you and asking for a teacher.
Oh, oops, I did decide
No,
I have a
Go
question.
ahead.
Mr. Matthew, how are we going to fund this?
As historically done in Dudley Charlton, we're not sitting on excess money in the general fund. We don't have a pot of money there. So we'll take it from circuit breaker. If we can put the expenses into the general fund at the end of the year and still maintain our E&D and all of those other factors, then we certainly will. But the default answer is from circuit breaker.
Thank
And
you.
there are sufficient funds there to cover this.
Thank you.
I have a question, Director Bergeron. You're talking about the creation of an additional intensive learning center pre-K class. Does that give us any options to maybe elicit from other districts if they need, do we have any spaces open that we could potentially take someone from another district if they need that support?
That's a possibility that I could explore. It's difficult to sort of explore that option in the middle of a school year.
Okay.
If the need for this classroom continues into next year, that's something that I would probably bring to the committee later this spring.
Okay.
But I
I just know
appreciate the
that
idea.
pre-K is one of those grades that, depending upon their age, it's when it hits the pre-K, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I have one more question. Someone asked me, do we have an intensive learning center at both of our elementary schools?
The pre-K intensive learning center is at Charlton Elementary School. There is not one at Mason Road this year.
And so students that live in Dudley would be transported to Charlton Elementary for these services?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other further questions? No? We'll move it to a vote. All those in favor? Okay.
Thank
I
you.
don't think, yep, motion carries. Unanimous. All right, moving on. We'll go to the appointment of the school secretary, Mrs. Erin Clark.
Madam Chair, as I shared at the last school committee meeting, Ms. Erin Glenn, our school committee secretary, is on leave, enjoying baby Owen. We do have a person in place for Ms. Glenn, Ms. Erin Clark. And for her to post school committee meetings and et cetera, she does need to be appointed officially as the school committee secretary at this time. I would respectfully ask that to be a posting through June 1st at this time.
Okay, so moved.
Second. Great. Is there any any discussion? No? Seeing that no discussion, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Great, that motion carries. Great. Before we go to adjournment, I just wanted to kind of touch base. We had a couple meetings coming up. We don't have another meeting. We have one more meeting next week in February, and then we don't have a meeting scheduled until March 8th, but we believe that we will need a meeting on Wednesday, March 1st. as another, like as a budgetary workshop. And that would also help with going back to our school committee goals of making sure we have more time for public comment. And I know we're going to have a lot of student voices that may want to have some time with us. I think that might be appropriate. Are people able to make that date?
Yes.
As of right now.
Yes, okay, so we will put that on our list of dates. Thank you very much for that.
Can we just discuss where it will be?
Oh, correct. Well, I would think it would need to be in Charlton, because if next week we're doing Dudley, and then
That makes
we don't have a second meeting in Charlton.
Okay.
So we'll make that in Charlton,
Thank you.
okay? Great. And then, so we have nothing further, I don't believe, so we'll move to an adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Great, all those in favor? Aye. Adjourned at 9:46. Thank you, everyone.